My parents spent $10,800 on my credit card for my sister's dream cruise vacation. MOM smirked. You don't need the money anyway. I just smiled. Enjoy it. While they were at sea, I sold the house they lived in rent-free. When they came back, 25 missed calls. Have you ever had your own family treat you like an ATM with a pulse? For 32 years, my entire life, that was me. But when my mother stole over $10,000 from my credit card to fund a luxury Caribbean cruise, something inside me finally, irrevocably snapped. And what I did next changed everything. That day, when my phone buzzed with a notification of a nearly $11,000 charge, to be exact, $10,800.77, my hands trembled. But it wasn't shock. Oh no, I'd stopped being shocked by my family's antics years ago. This was different. This was the final, cracking fissure in a dam that had been straining for far too long. My mother stood in my kitchen, cool as you please, like she owned the place. You don't need the money anyway, she declared, her voice dripping with that familiar, dismissive tone that had been a constant hum throughout my entire life. She waved her hand as if $10,000 was pocket change, like it was nothing. I'm Jessica. I'm 32, and I've spent the last decade busting my butt as a senior accountant at a gaming company in Columbus, Ohio. I scrimped, I saved, I invested. Enough to own 2 properties outright. My modest apartment where I live with my cat, and a 3-bedroom house I bought 5 years ago as an investment. That house, the one I'd worked countless overtime shifts for, the one I'd skipped vacations to afford, was currently occupied by my parents and my younger sister, Brittany. They'd been living there, rent-free, for the past 3 years. Brittany has been so stressed lately, Mom continued, settling into one of my dining chairs like she planned to stay all week. She really needed this vacation. You know how hard it's been for her since the breakup. The breakup. My 28-year-old sister had ended a 6-month relationship because her boyfriend had dared to suggest she might, get a job. That was 3 months ago. And apparently the trauma of being asked to contribute to society required a luxury Caribbean cruise to heal. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, you used my credit card without asking. That's fraud. She laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd just told a hilarious joke. Don't be dramatic, Jessica. It's family. We share things. Besides, your father and I haven't had a real vacation in years. You went to Florida last summer. I countered, a fresh wave of disbelief washing over me. That doesn't count. We stayed with your aunt. I took a deep breath. The familiar, suffocating weight settled on my shoulders. This was the pattern. Always. My parents took, I gave. And somehow, I was always the unreasonable one for having boundaries. I can't afford this right now, I tried again, even as I knew the words were useless. I have bills. I have my own expenses. My mother's expression hardened, shifted into something cold, calculating. You own 2 houses, Jessica. You make good money at that computer job of yours. Meanwhile, your father's back problems have kept him from working, and I've been taking care of the family. We've sacrificed everything for you girls, and this is how you repay us. The manipulation was so practiced, so smooth it almost worked. Almost. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of the amount. Maybe it was the way she'd helped herself to my financial information without a second thought. Or maybe, just maybe, I had finally hit the breaking point that had been building for years. When does the cruise leave? I asked, my voice surprisingly quiet. Saturday morning. We'll be gone for 12 days. She beamed, taking my question as acceptance. It's going to be wonderful. Brittany is so excited. You should see the suite we booked. It has a balcony and everything. I nodded slowly, my mind already racing. 12 days. They'd be unreachable. Somewhere in the Caribbean, spending money I would have to work months to recover. Money they had stolen from me without a second thought. Enjoy it, I said, and in a way she couldn't possibly grasp, I truly meant it. My mother beamed, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a child who had finally learned to share. I knew you'd understand. You've always been the responsible one. Jessica, the one we can count on. Yes, I thought, watching her gather her purse and head for the door. I had always been the one they could count on. The one who paid when they couldn't. The one who sacrificed so Brittany could have everything she wanted. The one who was always there to catch them when they fell, even as they pushed me further and further down. But not anymore. As the door closed behind her, I pulled up my banking app and stared at that charge one more time. $10,800. 3 years of free housing. Countless other expenses I had covered over the years, without acknowledgement or thanks. That number wasn't just a debt. It was a symbol of everything I had allowed them to take from me. I opened a new browser tab and typed in the address of a real estate website I had bookmarked months ago, back when I first started wondering if I'd ever have the courage to do what needed to be done. The house, my house, the one they treated like their personal kingdom. It was time to make some changes. If I'm being honest, this pattern of me being the provider and them being the takers started long before that cruise. It started before I could even remember, woven so deeply into our family dynamics that I had mistaken it for love. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the good daughter, the one who got straight A's without needing tutors or constant supervision. Brittany, for years younger, blessed with that delicate blonde prettiness our mother prized above all else, was the princess. She was sensitive. She needed extra attention. She couldn't be expected to handle the same responsibilities as her older sister because, well, life was just harder for her somehow. When Brittany wanted dance lessons, I gave up my spot in the school band so our parents could afford them. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, I quietly accepted that my college fund would take a hit. When she dropped out of community college because it was too stressful, I was already working 2 jobs to put myself through state university. And somehow, that made me the selfish one for not being available to help Mom with household chores. "You've always had it easy, Jessica," my mother would say, whenever I dared to point out the imbalance. "Everything comes naturally to you. Brittany has to work twice as hard for half the results." It wasn't true, of course. I had worked for everything I achieved, but the narrative had been set so early, repeated so often, that even I had started to believe it. Maybe I was just lucky. Maybe things did come easier to me. Maybe I did owe my family for the guilt of succeeding. Where Brittany failed, the house became the ultimate symbol of this dynamic. I had purchased it when I was 27, using every penny I had saved since my first job at 15. It was supposed to be a rental property, a way to build additional income, to secure my financial future. I researched the neighborhood, crunched the numbers, and felt genuinely proud of myself for the first time in years. Then my father's back gave out. "It's just temporary," my mother had said when she called to tell me they were losing their apartment. "Just until your father gets back on his feet." 6 months, maybe a year. That was 3 years ago. In that time, my father had been to exactly 2 doctor's appointments and made 0 effort to find work he could do with his condition. My mother had quit her part-time job at the grocery store because it was too exhausting to work and take care of my father and Brittany, who had moved back in after her most recent relationship imploded. Brittany, of course, hadn't held a job in over 2 years. Meanwhile, I continued paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, most of their utilities. When the water heater broke, I paid. When the roof needed repairs, I covered it. When my mother mentioned casually that they couldn't afford Christmas gifts, I sent money. When Brittany complained she needed new clothes for job interviews she never actually attended, I transferred funds. I stopped keeping track of the total somewhere around $40,000. It was easier not to know, easier to pretend I was just helping family, just being a good daughter, just doing what anyone would do in my situation. But the small betrayals added up. The way my mother would post photos of fancy dinners on social media while telling me they could barely afford groceries. The way Brittany would show off new designer bags while I budgeted for basic necessities. The way my father would complain about being bored while rejecting any suggestion of remote work he could do from home. I remember calling them last Thanksgiving, hoping we might actually spend the holiday together for once. My mother had sighed heavily, explaining they simply couldn't afford the gas money to drive the 40 minutes to my apartment. I offered to come to them, to bring the entire meal, to do all the work, so they wouldn't have to lift a finger. "Oh, that's sweet," she'd said. But Brittany already made plans for us to have dinner at that new Italian place downtown. You know how she's been craving authentic pasta. Maybe next year. The Italian place downtown. The one where entrees started at $50 a plate. The one they couldn't afford, but somehow always found the money for when Brittany wanted to go. I spent that Thanksgiving alone, eating leftover takeout, telling myself it didn't matter. That family was complicated. That everyone had their struggles. That I should be grateful I was in a position to help, even if that help was never acknowledged or reciprocated. Now, sitting in my apartment with a $10,800 charge staring back at me, I could no longer maintain the comfortable delusions I had built around my family. They hadn't borrowed my credit card information. They hadn't asked permission. They had simply taken what they wanted, secure in the knowledge that I would absorb the cost as I always did. My mother had smirked when she told me. Smirked like my financial security was a joke. Like I existed solely to fund their lifestyle while they contributed nothing in return. I thought about the house again. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a nice backyard. Worth approximately $280,000 in the current market. Housing a family of 3 who paid nothing and expected everything. The crews left Saturday. They would be unreachable for 12 days. 12 days with no phone service, no internet, no way to interfere with whatever decisions I might make in their absence. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the unthinkable. They set sail on Saturday morning. I know this because my mother sent me a picture of the 3 of them on the ship's deck. Champagne glasses raised, huge smiles plastered across their faces. The caption read, "Family vacation, finally. Thanks for making dreams come true." Thanks for making dreams come true. She had actually written that, as if I had generously gifted them this trip, rather than having it stolen from me through unauthorized charges on my credit card. I stared at that photo for a long time, zooming in on their expressions. My mother, resplendent in a new sundress I had certainly never seen before. My father, looking healthier than he had in years. His supposed chronic back pain apparently no hindrance to posing dramatically against the railing. And Brittany, beautiful Brittany, with her highlighted hair and perfect tan, beaming at the camera like she deserved every luxury the world had to offer. They hadn't even invited me. Not that I would have gone. Not that I could have afforded the time off work. But the exclusion still stung in a way I hadn't expected. 3 family members on a luxury cruise, and the one who made it financially possible wasn't even an afterthought. That's when the clarity came. Not as anger, though there was plenty of that simmering beneath the surface. Not as hurt, though decades of accumulated wounds ached in my chest. No, what settled over me was something calmer and far more dangerous. A crystalline understanding. I had been trained for this role my entire life. I was the provider, the responsible one, the one who never complained, never demanded, never expected anything in return. My family had conditioned me to accept their treatment as normal, to feel guilty for my success rather than proud of it, to believe that loving them meant allowing them to take whatever they wanted without consequence. And I had let them. Year after year, sacrifice after sacrifice, I had enabled this dynamic because I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. Would they still love me if I stopped paying? Would I still be part of the family if I demanded fairness? The fear of rejection had kept me compliant, kept me quiet, kept me bleeding money and energy into a void that only grew hungrier with each offering. But sitting there, watching that photo of them celebrating with my stolen money, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The fear wasn't gone, but it was no longer paralyzing. In its place was a cold, clear recognition that this relationship had only ever flowed in one direction, and I was utterly exhausted from swimming against the current. They hadn't apologized for taking the money. They hadn't even acknowledged that what they did was wrong. My mother's casual dismissal, her absolute certainty that I would simply absorb another blow, revealed how little they thought of me. I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource, an ATM with a heartbeat. That evening, I did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I sat down with a spreadsheet and calculated exactly how much money I had given my family over the past 3 years. Not rough estimates, not vague recollections, but actual numbers pulled from bank statements and credit card records. The total was staggering. $73,000. That included the free housing, the utilities I covered, the emergency funds I had sent, the gifts that were never reciprocated, and now the cruise. $73,000 I had essentially lit on fire to keep people warm who would never do the same for me. I thought about what that money could have meant for my own life. A European trip I'd always dreamed about but never taken. Security for my future instead of subsidizing their present. And then I thought about the house I owned outright. The house they lived in without a lease, without a rental agreement, without any legal documentation that gave them rights to remain there. I had been so focused on being a good daughter, on not making waves, that I had never formalized our arrangement. They were guests in my property, overstaying guests who had taken advantage of my hospitality for 3 years. My phone buzzed with another photo. This one showed an elaborate seafood dinner, plates piled high with lobster and crab legs. Eating like royalty tonight, the message read. Eating like royalty on my dime. While I sat in my apartment, calculating the extra hours I would need to work to pay off their vacation. Something in me hardened, completely. Not broke, hardened. The part of me that had always made excuses, always found reasons to forgive, always prioritized their comfort over my own well-being, finally calcified into something unbreakable. I was done. Not gradually done. Not maybe done. Not done unless they apologized. Done. I was finished being the family safety net. I was finished sacrificing my financial security for people who saw my generosity as their birthright. I was finished pretending this was normal, acceptable, or anything less than systematic exploitation of someone who had loved them unconditionally. They had 12 days at sea. 12 days of lobster dinners and champagne toasts and family bonding that excluded me. 12 days during which they would be completely unreachable, unable to interfere with whatever choices I made. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Patricia, my real estate agent. She'd helped me purchase both of my properties. We'd stayed in touch, and she'd mentioned more than once that she could get me excellent offers on either property if I ever decided to sell. My thumb hovered over the call button. This would change everything. There would be no going back from this decision, no pretending it hadn't happened, no family reconciliation after I crossed this line. I thought about my mother's smirk, my father's fake bad back, Brittany's endless entitlement. I pressed call. Jessica, it's so good to hear from you. Patricia's warm voice came through the phone, professional but friendly. How are things? Still happy with the apartment? Very happy, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Actually, I'm calling about the other property, the house on Maple Drive. Oh, I could practically hear her interest sharpen. Are you finally thinking about selling? I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. 3 years. The exact amount of time my family had been living there rent-free. Patricia didn't know the details of my arrangement, but she had always been clear that the house was in a desirable neighborhood with strong market demand. What do you think I could get for it in the current market? She paused. I heard the click of a keyboard in the background. Let me pull up the recent comparables. Okay, so looking at similar homes in that area that have sold in the past 6 months, you're looking at anywhere from $270,000 to $300,000, depending on condition. Is the property still in good shape? I thought about all the repairs I had paid for over the years. The new water heater, the roof work, the updated appliances I had installed before my family moved in. It should be. I've maintained it well. Then I'd estimate we could list at $285,000 and potentially get offers above asking. The market is hot right now, especially for move-in ready homes in good school districts. She paused. Do you want me to come take a look? I could do a walkthrough and give you a more accurate assessment. This was where it got complicated. There's a situation, I said carefully. The house is currently occupied. Oh, you have tenants. That's not necessarily a problem. We can either sell with tenants in place or wait for the lease to expire, depending on what works better for your timeline. Not exactly tenants, I confessed. Family members. And there's no formal lease agreement. The silence on the other end stretched for a moment. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had shifted into a more serious register. Okay, that does change things slightly. Are they aware you're considering selling? No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way for now. Another pause. Jessica, I want to help you, but I also need to make sure we're doing everything properly. Without a lease, they're essentially guests or at-will occupants. In Ohio, you would need to provide them with reasonable notice to vacate, typically 30 days, before we could show the house to buyers. However, there are some buyers who might be interested in purchasing with current occupants, especially investors looking for rental properties. I had done my research. I knew the legal requirements, but I also knew something else. What if the sale closed while they were out of town? I asked. They're currently on a cruise. Gone for 12 days. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That's an aggressive timeline, but not impossible if we find a cash buyer who wants to move quickly. There are investors who specifically look for exactly this type of situation. Fast closings, no contingencies, willing to handle occupant transitions themselves. How fast? I've closed deals in 7 days before. 10 is more typical for a rush situation. She hesitated. Jessica, are you sure about this? Selling a property out from under family members is, well, it's a significant decision. I'm not judging. I'm just making sure you've thought it through. Had I thought it through? I had thought about nothing else since my mother walked out of my apartment with that smug smile. I had thought about the years of sacrifice, the tens of thousands of dollars, the complete lack of appreciation or reciprocity. I had thought about what it meant to be treated as a resource rather than a person. I'm sure, I said. I want to proceed. All right then. Let me make some calls and see who might be interested in a quick purchase. I have a few investor clients who are always looking for opportunities like this. Can you send me any updated photos of the interior? This was where it got tricky. I hadn't been inside the house in nearly a year. My family had made it clear that my visits were intrusions, that I was somehow being rude by wanting to see my own property. But I had the original listing photos from when I bought the place, and I still had keys. I can get you photos by tomorrow, I said. And Patricia, thank you for not making this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm here to help my clients achieve their goals, she said. Whatever those goals might be. I'll be in touch. After hanging up, I sat with my decision for a while. The magnitude of what I was setting in motion was not lost on me. This would permanently alter my relationship with my family, assuming there was any relationship left to alter after this. My mother would never forgive me. My father would likely never speak to me again. Brittany would probably post something dramatic on social media about betrayal and family and how she'd always known I was jealous of her. But strangely, none of that felt as terrifying as it once had. The fear of losing my family had kept me compliant for years. But what was I actually losing? People who only contacted me when they needed something? A mother who mocked my concerns about being robbed? A father who couldn't be bothered to attend my college graduation but made sure to attend every single one of Brittany's dance recitals? A sister who had never once asked about my life, my work, my hopes, or my dreams? I logged into the property management portal I used to track both of my properties. There it was. The house on Maple Drive. My house. The one I had sweated and saved and sacrificed for. The one that had become a symbol of everything wrong with my family dynamic. As I stared at the listing at the address I had memorized years ago, I noticed something in the documents section I hadn't seen before. A file had been uploaded recently, within the past month. I clicked on it. It was a form, a residency declaration form, partially filled out in my mother's handwriting. The form stated that the occupants of the property had established residency and were requesting formal recognition of their status as long-term residents. My blood ran cold. They were trying to establish legal residency rights to my house, trying to make it harder for me to ever remove them. Whatever lingering doubts, I had vanished in that moment. This wasn't just about the cruise money anymore. This was about survival. My survival. I picked up my phone and texted Patricia. How soon can we meet? The next day, I took a personal day from work for the first time in over 2 years. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. My family was the emergency, and I was finally treating it as such. I met Patricia at a coffee shop near her office at 10 a.m., arriving early to claim a corner table away from other customers. When she walked in, she was carrying a folder thick with papers and wearing an expression of professional determination. I made some calls last night, she said as she sat down, dispensing with pleasantries. I have 3 potential buyers who might be interested in a quick purchase. One is particularly motivated, an investor named Gerald, who specializes in exactly these types of situations. He buys properties fast, handles any occupant issues himself, and pays cash. How much would he offer for a quick closing with occupants in place? Probably around $260,000. It's below market value, but the convenience factor is significant. He'd be taking on the responsibility of dealing with whoever's living there. $260,000. Less than the house was worth, but still a substantial amount. More importantly, it would be done quickly, cleanly, and before my family returned from their luxury vacation. What about that residency form I found? I asked. Does that change anything? Patricia shook her head. I looked into that. In Ohio, simply filling out a form doesn't establish legal residency rights, especially when the form was never filed with any official agency. Your family members are what we call licensees, people who have permission to occupy a property but no legal tenancy rights. That permission can be revoked at any time. And if the property is sold while they're occupying it, the new owner would be responsible for removing them if they refuse to leave voluntarily. In Gerald's case, he has lawyers and processes for exactly this scenario. He's dealt with much more complicated situations than family members who overstayed their welcome. I thought about my parents returning from their cruise to find the locks changed and a notice from a stranger telling them they had 30 days to vacate. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to prioritize their feelings over my own, winced at the image. But a larger part, the part that had finally woken up after years of dormancy, felt something closer to satisfaction. Tell me more about this Gerald. Patricia pulled out a business card. He's been in real estate investment for 20 years. Very professional, very discreet. He understands that these situations often involve complicated family dynamics, and he doesn't ask questions. What he offers is a clean transaction and a complete separation from whatever issues exist with the current occupants. Has he expressed interest in my property specifically? I sent him the details last night. He drove by the house this morning and called me an hour ago to say he's prepared to make an offer. $265,000. All cash. Closing in 7 days. 7 days. My family would still be at sea. The cruise didn't return for another 11 days. I could have this entire transaction completed before they even stepped off the boat. What do I need to do? Patricia slid a stack of papers across the table. First, we need to go over the disclosure requirements. Ohio law requires sellers to disclose certain information about the property's condition. You'll also need to confirm that there are no liens, encumbrances, or legal issues that could complicate the sale. She paused. And I need to ask you directly, just for the record. Is there any reason this sale shouldn't proceed? I thought about the question carefully. Was there any legal reason I couldn't sell my own property? No. Was there any moral obligation to people who had exploited my generosity for years? I didn't believe so anymore. Was there any part of me that wanted to back out, to preserve the dysfunctional status quo, to keep being the family doormat? No, there wasn't. No reason at all, I said. Let's proceed. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork. I signed disclosure forms, straightforward, almost anticlimactic given the magnitude of what I was doing. By noon, we had everything in place for an expedited sale. As I was gathering my things to leave, Patricia touched my arm gently. Jessica, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of family situations, some of them pretty ugly. I want you to know that whatever led you to this decision, you're not doing anything wrong. That's your property. You have every right to sell it. I appreciated her words more than I could express. Thank you, Patricia. I know this must seem strange, selling a house out from under my own parents. It doesn't seem strange at all, she said quietly. It seems like someone finally decided to stop being taken advantage of. In my experience, that takes more courage than most people have. I left the coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. The decision was made. The wheels were in motion. And for the first time I could remember, I was putting my own needs first. That evening, my phone buzzed with another photo from the cruise. This one showed Brittany posing by the pool in a bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Living my best life, the caption read, followed by a string of celebratory emojis. Living her best life on my stolen money. While I sat alone, processing the reality that I was about to fundamentally change all of our lives. I didn't respond to the photo. Instead, I opened my banking app and looked at the pending charge one more time. $10,800. It would take me months to pay off. Months of extra work and careful budgeting. Months of sacrifice so my family could drink champagne and eat lobster. Then I looked at the email Patricia had sent me with the preliminary sales agreement. $265,000. Enough to pay off the cruise, pay off any lingering guilt, and still have a substantial sum left over to invest in my own future, rather than my family's bottomless needs. The math was simple. The emotions were complicated. But for once in my life, I was choosing myself. The sale moved faster than even Patricia had predicted. Gerald, the investor, was exactly as professional and efficient as she had described. He requested minimal documentation, asked no questions about why I was selling so quickly, and had his legal team prepare the closing paperwork within 48 hours. 3 days after my meeting with Patricia, I received an email confirming that Gerald had completed his final review and was prepared to close immediately. The only remaining step was my signature on the final documents, which I could complete electronically. I stared at the signature line for a long time. This was it, the point of no return. Once I signed, the house would no longer be mine. My parents and Brittany would be occupants of someone else's property, subject to eviction at the new owner's discretion. My phone buzzed. Another cruise update. This time it was a video my mother had posted to her social media, showing all 3 of them at some kind of shipboard entertainment show. They were laughing, clapping along to the music, looking happier and more carefree than I had seen them in years. All on my dime, without even a pretense of gratitude. I signed the documents. The confirmation came through almost immediately. "Congratulations on your sale," the email read. "Closing is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Funds will be transferred within 24 to 48 hours of closing tomorrow." In less than 24 hours, I would no longer own the house on Maple Drive. My family would no longer be living in my property. The dynamic that had defined our relationship for 3 years, longer if you counted all the other ways they had exploited me, would be irrevocably changed. I expected to feel guilty. I had been conditioned my entire life to feel guilty about putting myself first, about not sacrificing enough, about not being generous enough with people who never reciprocated. But as I sat in my apartment that evening, watching the sunset through my window, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Genuine, profound peace. For the first time I could remember, I had made a decision based entirely on my own needs and desires. Not what my mother wanted. Not what would make Brittany happy. Not what would keep the family peace. My choice. My property. My life. The closing happened the next afternoon without any complications. I signed the final paperwork electronically while sitting at my desk at work, minimizing the window whenever a coworker walked by. The funds transfer initiated immediately. $265,000 deposited into my account, minus closing costs and Patricia's commission. Even after everything, I walked away with over $240,000. Gerald, the new owner, wasted no time. Within hours of the closing, he had his property management team change the locks and post formal notices on the property. The notices informed any current occupants that the property had been sold and provided 30 days to vacate. Standard procedure for an investor taking over an occupied property. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. Not my coworkers. Not my few close friends. Not the couple of distant relatives I occasionally spoke to. This was between me and my family, and they would find out soon enough. The cruise ship was scheduled to return to port on Sunday morning. By my calculation, my family would arrive back in Columbus sometime Sunday evening. They would drive to the house on Maple Drive, exhausted from travel, but still riding high on 12 days of luxury and indulgence. They would walk up to the door, probably complaining about having to carry their own luggage, and they would find the locks changed and an official notice taped to the front door. I wondered how long it would take them to understand what had happened. My mother, sharp as ever when it came to identifying threats to her comfortable existence, would probably figure it out immediately. My father might take longer, his denial mechanisms running deep. Brittany would likely cry and post something dramatic online before the reality even fully sunk in. And then they would call me. I was certain of that. They would call and scream and demand explanations and accuse me of betrayal and cruelty and everything else they could think of to make me feel guilty. For finally refusing to be their victim any longer. I prepared myself for those calls, not to answer them necessarily, but to withstand the onslaught of notifications, voicemails, and text messages that would inevitably flood my phone. I drafted a single response that I would send once, and only once. You chose to use my credit card without permission for a luxury vacation. I chose to sell my property. Both were choices. Both have consequences. The days between the closing and their return were some of the most peaceful I had experienced in years. I went to work. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed instead of whatever was cheapest. I started researching vacation destinations I might actually visit someday, now that I wasn't funneling all my disposable income into supporting my family. I also did something I had been avoiding for years. I found a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and made an appointment for the week after my family returned. Whatever happened next, I knew I needed professional support to process decades of conditioning and dysfunction. This decision, as right as it felt, was still one of the hardest things I had ever done. On Saturday night, the night before their ship was due to port, I turned off my phone completely. Not silenced, not on Do Not Disturb. Completely powered down. I wasn't ready to face their reaction, and I had learned, finally, that I didn't have to be available on their timeline. I slept better that night than I had in months. No anxiety about what they might need from me. No guilt about what I wasn't providing. No fear about what would happen when the money ran out, because the money was finally mine to control. When I woke up Sunday morning, I made myself a proper breakfast, something I rarely did. Eggs Benedict from scratch. Fresh squeezed orange juice. Proper coffee from the fancy beans I had been saving for a special occasion. It felt like a celebration because I was celebrating my own independence for the first time in my adult life. Around 11 a.m., I turned my phone back on. Immediately, the notifications began flooding in. Text messages, voicemails, missed calls, 25 missed calls, to be exact, all from my mother's number. The texts were a cascade of increasing panic and rage. The voicemails, I was sure, would be even worse. I looked at the number on my screen. 25 missed calls. I smiled and poured myself another cup of coffee. The voicemails told a story of their own. A narrative arc that began with confusion and escalated through denial, anger, and finally, something approaching genuine panic. The first message, left at 8:47 p.m. the previous evening, was my mother's voice, clipped and irritated. "Jessica, we're home and the door won't open. Did you change the locks while we were gone? What's going on? Call me back." The second, from 8:52 p.m. "Jessica, there's some kind of notice on the door about the property being sold. This is obviously some kind of mistake. Call me immediately." The third, 9:15 p.m. My father's voice this time confused and plaintive. "Honey, your mother is very upset. We can't get into the house. Please call us and tell us what's happening." Then the messages from my mother resumed, her tone escalating with each one. By the fifth voicemail, she was shouting. By the eighth, she was crying. By the 12th, she had circled back to cold fury, threatening legal action, disownment, and various forms of retribution that would never materialize. Brittany left only 2 messages. The first was accusatory and dramatic. "I can't believe you would do this to us. To your own family. You're a monster, Jessica. An actual monster." The second, left several hours later, was tearful and manipulative. "I don't have anywhere to go. Where am I supposed to sleep? Don't you care about me at all?" I listened to all 23 voicemails while sitting on my couch with my coffee, letting the waves of their distress wash over me without pulling me under. Each message reinforced my decision rather than undermining it. Not once in any of those recordings did any of them apologize for stealing $10,800 from me. Not once did they acknowledge that they had been living in my house, rent-free, for 3 years. Not once did they express any understanding that their actions had consequences. Instead, it was all about them, their inconvenience, their suffering, their victimhood. In their narrative, they were innocent parties who had been cruelly wronged by an ungrateful daughter who owed them everything and had given them nothing. Around noon, the text messages started taking a different tone. My mother, apparently having regrouped, began sending long paragraphs about how she understood I might be upset about the cruise charges, but that this was an extreme overreaction. She offered to pay me back for the vacation, over time, a promise I knew she would never keep. She explained that they hadn't meant to upset me. They just assumed I wouldn't mind given how generous I had always been. She still didn't apologize. She explained. She rationalized. She reframed. But she never simply said, "I'm sorry for taking your money," without asking. Brittany's messages were more sporadic, alternating between fury and calculated vulnerability. She reminded me of all the times I had helped her in the past, as if that history entitled her to my indefinite support. She accused me of jealousy, of always resenting her for being prettier and more popular. She threatened to tell everyone we knew what I had done, to expose me as the cruel, heartless person I apparently was. I saved all of these messages, partly for documentation in case any of their legal threats materialized into actual action, partly because I wanted a record of who they really were in case my resolve ever wavered in the future. At 2 p.m., my mother tried a different tactic. She sent a message that was almost reasonable, asking if we could talk in person, just the two of us, to work through whatever was going on. She suggested a coffee shop near my apartment, somewhere neutral. She even offered to come to me, a reversal of years of making me chase after them. For a moment, I considered it. The part of me that had been trained to de-escalate, to smooth things over, to prioritize peace at any cost, stirred briefly. Maybe we could work something out. Maybe there was a path forward that didn't require complete estrangement. Then I remembered her smirk. The way she had dismissed my concerns about the cruise charges. The casual assumption that my money was her money, that my property was her property, that my life existed to service her needs. I typed out my prepared response. You chose to use my credit card without permission for a luxury vacation. I chose to sell my property. Both were choices. Both have consequences. I hit send, and then I did something I should have done years ago. I blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's number. Then I blocked Brittany's number. Then, for good measure, I blocked all of them on social media and email. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely unreachable by my family. They could not call me, text me, message me, or contact me through any digital means. If they wanted to reach me, they would have to physically show up at my apartment. And I was prepared for that possibility, too. They showed up 3 days later. I had been expecting it. Honestly, my mother was nothing if not persistent, and she would never accept being blocked without confronting me directly. I was working from home that day, a Wednesday, when I heard the pounding on my apartment door. Not knocking. Pounding. Fists against wood, rhythmic and angry. Jessica, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. My mother's voice, shrill with indignation. I stayed at my desk, continuing to type, letting her exhaust herself against my closed door. This is ridiculous. You can't just refuse to talk to us. We're your family. The pounding continued for several minutes. I heard my father's voice murmuring something, probably trying to calm her down. Then Brittany chimed in, her tone somewhere between whining and demanding. Jessica, please. We just want to understand. What did we do wrong? What did they do wrong? As if they genuinely didn't know. As if taking $10,800 without permission was somehow ambiguous. As if living rent-free in my property for 3 years while I paid all the expenses was standard family behavior. Eventually, the commotion attracted attention. I heard my neighbor's door open. Heard voices asking if everything was okay. Heard my mother try to explain that she was just visiting her daughter. The building had strict policies about disturbances, and I knew the front desk would be called if this continued. After about 20 minutes, the noise stopped. I heard footsteps retreating. Heard the elevator ding. Heard silence return to my hallway. I waited another 10 minutes before checking, just to be safe. They were gone. That evening, I found a letter slipped under my door. My mother's handwriting, cramped and urgent, on unlined paper that had clearly been torn from a notebook. Jessica, I don't understand what's happening. Yes, we used your credit card, but we've always shared as a family. You never complained before. Is this really about money? Because I know you have plenty. You've always been the successful one, the one who didn't need help. We're the ones struggling. Your father can barely walk most days. Brittany has depression. I'm exhausted from taking care of everyone. And now you've thrown us out of the only home we had. We're staying at a motel because of you. A motel? Is that what you wanted? To see your own family suffer? I raised you better than this. I sacrificed everything for you girls, and this is how you repay me? I will never forgive you for this. Never. But I'm still your mother. And if there's any chance we can work this out, call me Mom. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the file I was keeping with all their other communications. Every word reinforced my decision. The manipulation, the guilt-tripping, the complete absence of accountability. Even now, facing the consequences of their actions, they could not acknowledge that they had done anything wrong. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said. The time for discussions and negotiations and giving them another chance had passed. I had given them hundreds of chances over 32 years, and they had used every single one to take more from me. The next few weeks were surprisingly quiet. I learned later that they had eventually found temporary housing with a distant cousin on my mother's side, someone I had met maybe twice in my entire life. That arrangement lasted about 3 weeks before they wore out their welcome there, too. Meanwhile, I was doing something I had never allowed myself to do. I was living my own life without the constant drain of their needs and demands. I kept my appointments with my new therapist, who helped me understand that what I had experienced wasn't just family drama, but a pattern of financial and emotional abuse. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the years of being my family's unpaid caretaker. I started making plans for my future that included only my own goals and desires. It wasn't easy. The guilt my mother had programmed into me didn't disappear overnight. Some days I would wake up convinced I had made a terrible mistake, that I was the monster Brittany accused me of being. But those days grew less frequent as time passed. The peace of not being constantly needed, constantly drained, constantly taken advantage of, was worth more than I could have imagined. The $10,800 from the cruise remained on my credit card, accruing interest. I paid it off methodically, refusing to let it burden me financially, even though it continued to burn as a symbol of their betrayal. With the money from the house sale now invested and earning returns, I could afford the payments easily. It felt fitting somehow that their vacation would be the last thing I ever paid for on their behalf. 1 month after the house sale, I received a formal letter from a lawyer. My mother, apparently, had made good on her threat of legal action. The letter claimed I had illegally evicted family members from their established residence and demanded compensation of $100,000 for their suffering and relocation expenses. I forwarded the letter to a lawyer of my own, someone Patricia had recommended who specialized in property disputes. Her response was swift and reassuring. "They have no case," she told me over the phone. "The property was yours, free and clear. They had no lease, no rental agreement, nothing that established legal tenancy. The new owner followed proper eviction procedures. This is harassment, pure and simple. What should I do?" I asked. "Ignore it. If they actually file suit, which I doubt given the weakness of their position, will respond accordingly. But most likely, this is just an attempt to intimidate you into giving them money." She was right. No lawsuit ever materialized. The threatening letters stopped after a few weeks, presumably when whatever lawyer my mother had found actually reviewed the facts and realized they had nothing to work with. 6 months after the house sale, I learned through the family grapevine, a cousin who still spoke to both sides, that my parents had finally found stable housing. They were renting an apartment in a less desirable part of town, smaller and shabbier than the house they had occupied for free. My father had been forced to apply for disability benefits, a process he had avoided for years because it required actually documenting his condition. Brittany had moved in with a boyfriend she had met online, a relationship that reportedly wasn't going well. I felt no satisfaction at their struggles, but I also felt no guilt. Their circumstances were the result of their own choices. Decades of choices that had led them to depend entirely on exploiting others rather than building anything sustainable for themselves. I had been their favorite target, but I was no longer available. They would have to face reality without me as a buffer. My own life, meanwhile, had transformed. The money from the house sale was safely invested, earning returns that would contribute to a comfortable retirement. The apartment I lived in felt truly mine for the first time, not just a place I slept between sessions of supporting my family. I had taken a vacation, my first real vacation in years. A week in the mountains where I hiked and read and didn't answer my phone because there was no one demanding anything from me. The therapy helped me understand that I hadn't just been generous to my family. I had been trained to be their caretaker, to believe that my value came from what I could provide rather than who I was. Breaking that pattern was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most necessary. My mother tried to reach out one more time, about 8 months after everything happened. She found my work email somehow and sent a message that was equal parts accusation and appeal. She was getting older, she wrote. Her health wasn't good. She didn't want to die with this rift between us. Wouldn't I consider reconciling for the sake of the family? I read the email carefully, looking for any sign of genuine accountability, any acknowledgement of what they had done wrong. any actual apology, not for the circumstances, but for the behavior that had led to them. There was none. Just the same manipulation. The same assumption that I owed them something. The same absolute blindness to their own role in our estrangement. I deleted the email without responding. Some relationships cannot be repaired because the foundation was rotten from the start. My family had never seen me as a person with my own needs and boundaries. They had seen me as a resource. And when the resource stopped flowing, they had nothing left to offer except demands for more. I heard through the same cousin that my mother told everyone who would listen that I had betrayed them over money, that I had always been cold and selfish, that they had sacrificed everything for me and received nothing in return. The narrative she constructed was almost impressive in its complete inversion of reality. In her version, she was the victim and I was the villain, but I had stopped caring about her version. I had my own truth, documented in credit card statements and bank records, and the deed to a house I had once owned. I had my own peace, hard-won and precious. I had my own future, no longer mortgaged to support people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. The last I heard, my mother's health continued to decline. My father remained largely housebound. And Brittany was on her third boyfriend since being forced to actually support herself. The cousin said there was talk of them trying to reconnect with extended family members they had alienated over the years, looking for new sources of support now that I was gone. I wished them luck with that. I truly did. Not because I forgave them, but because their happiness or misery was no longer my responsibility. I had carried them for so long that putting them down felt like setting down a weight I hadn't even realized was crushing me. The house on Maple Drive had been sold to an investor who renovated it and rented it to a nice young couple. According to Patricia, the neighborhood remained desirable. The market remained strong. And life continued as it always did, with or without my family's drama at its center. As for me, I was finally free to find out who I was when I wasn't sacrificing everything for people who gave nothing back. And that discovery, more than the money, more than the revenge, was the real prize I had won. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that selling that house wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life from people who had been slowly stealing it, piece by piece, for 32 years. They called it betrayal. I called it survival. And given the choice again, I would make exactly the same decision, without hesitation and without regret. So tell me, have you ever faced a moment like this, where you had to make an impossible choice to protect yourself? What would you have done in my place? I really want to know what you think in the comments below.